So we do have a captioner. So if you would like to have captions on, you should be able to see a button on your Zoom menu that has CC on it and maybe live transcripts. And that will bring up the captions on your screen. And if you would like to contribute to our conversation, you can use the chat box, but make sure next to that word "to" at the bottom, click on the drop down and make it say all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you have to say. That's the easiest way to throw any questions or comments out there. And we are going to have a debriefing meeting right after this at 4 o'clock. If you have any more detailed things that you would like to discuss with Lucia or our previous presenter that we just had, Tess McCarthy, who presented on hand movements for Braille. So let me, hold on a second here. Okay. Right, so we have some handouts. The handout is going to be updated, but there is something available right now on the web page for this event on our website. And the recording will be added to, and so it's actually on the agenda. So if you look at the agenda for this entire event, Brailing with the Experts, you will see links to handouts for everything, and the links to recordings are being added to that same agenda as well. And all of that will be moved to our past events page next week. So keep an eye out for that if there's anything that you missed this week. And we are providing ACVREP and in-service credit for the majority of our sessions this week. If you are looking for that, you're going to want this opening code, which is SCAN, S-C-A-N, SCAN. So hold on to that, and then you'll get the closing code at the end of the session, and I'll tell you how to get that 1.5 credits towards your CEUs. So as I said earlier, this is Lucia Hasty presenting for us on teaching tactile graphics. If you joined any of our sessions over the summer, you would have seen her. She is a tactile graphic guru, I would say. So we are very fortunate to have her presenting for us today. So I will stop sharing now and let Lucia go ahead and take over.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens when I do this. Okay. That's interesting. Do you, I don't see, do you see my screen?
I am seeing, let me double check because I have multiple screens here.
I don't see that, yeah, I don't see the screen thing. You have it, I think.
So I stopped sharing and I gave you permission. So you should see the green up arrow in your Zoom menu. Maybe at the bottom of your screen.
There it is. Okay.
Okay, something's happening.
Yeah, I'm seeing
there
something.
There we go.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, because I see your PowerPoint.
Oh, good. That's interesting. Because I'm not seeing what I should be seeing. Huh, okay.
Well, I can see the chat for you if there are questions, and I can pass those on to you.
I'm not seeing the chat at all. That's real interesting. Okay. I'm also not seeing my notes that are on the side, so we'll see whether or not I can pull this off. This will be fun. Greetings. I'm glad to see all of you. There are a bunch of you. This is great. Today we're going to talk about teaching students to read tactile graphics. And what we're going to cover in this hour and a half is the prerequisites for understanding and decoding tactile graphics. We're going to talk about the 3 important skill sets that your students need in order to make this work. And talk about some strategies that successful tactile graphics readers use. And there'll be a lot of resources as well. in the PowerPoint that was posted, there are not as many of the image files, which I added later. I was going to do sort of a show and tell and realized that was going to be unmanageable. So I just put the pictures actually in the PowerPoint that you're going to see today. And we're going to post the adapted one once we're done today to go from there. So as you know, there are not any existing curricula to teach tactile graphics. There are bits and pieces in a number of different places. And we're going to talk about some of those today. I'm going to help you figure out what some of those are. But there's no start to finish teaching kids to do tactile graphics, which is really not the greatest idea, but that's sort of how it is. Kids need to have 3 very specific skill sets. Their vocabulary, concepts, and mechanics. And we're going to talk about each one of those. From the time kids are really, really little, we need to make sure that our vocabulary is very clear and very oriented to what they physically are going to be seeing, what they're going to be touching, what the textures are, the names for those textures, because learning goes from concrete, real objects, to manipulatives, to replicas of the real objects, to abstract, which is the symbolic representation. And so when you see a tactile graphic, that's the most abstract form. Kids need to learn this in context with their other learning materials as they go along. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about vocabulary. We should be using descriptive words for all the textures that kids are encountering from the time they're very little. The areas, smooth, rough, striped, patterned, fuzzy, bumpy, whatever the words are that will describe the texture that they're feeling, that they're encountering along the way. These words need to become very much a part of their own vocabulary. The lines that that they're going to be seeing and hopefully following, solid, wide, narrow, dotted, dashed, smooth, bumpy, whatever kinds of words that will help describe and help your reader begin to understand what they're looking at is what we need to make sure is infused in their vocabulary. And point symbols, the name of the shape, if it's a circle or an oval or a star or whatever, whether or not the shape is pointy, whether it's rounded, whether it's smooth, whether it's hollow, whether it's solid. So those are the kinds of words that we want to make sure from the time kids are little until they get older. And look at, as you ask your students to describe something or tell you what they're looking at, listen carefully to the words they're using, because how they perceive it is the word that you want to add to your vocabulary. You can also share some of the ways you might call it striped, or I grew up in the South and that word is striped in the South. They might call it lines, an area that has a lot of lines that are like parallel. So you may call it something different. But help kids identify those vocabulary words as you go along. Some of the concepts that are really, really important. I mentioned that the sequence for learning goes from concrete to symbols, or to replicas, and then to the symbols that you see in a tactile graphic. And so what we want to do is help kids learn how these symbols represent the information. We don't want to say this is a car. We want to say this is a picture of a car, or this is a tactile graphic of a car, or this is a drawing of a car. We want to use words that help them understand that this represents whatever it is we're trying to show them. Spatial relationships in the vocabulary around that is really, really important, so that the reader, as well as you, the teacher, can discuss the where things are in proximity to each other. So we're talking about things like next to, above, below, parallel, all of those words that that you need to have when you're talking about what a graphic looks like. A real important thing that we forget about very often is views. And kids need to understand that you can look at things from different directions, and that you may be talking about a front view or a side view or a top view. And when we start talking about maps, we're talking about an aerial view or a top view. And kids need to understand where that comes from. And you're going to want to go through some real life activities with kids to help them help them understand what those views are and where they come from. And so we're talking about cross section, frontal, aerial, or top view, side view, that whole group of things. Probably the most difficult concept for kids is when you go from a 3D object to a 2D object. And there are tons of fun things that you can do with kids to help them make that transition. So if, for instance, you have a real bunny or a cat or a real dog, and then you look at a replica, which could be a stuffed animal, it could be a little plastic model, it could be whatever, and then you look at an outline of it, those activities need to happen. In setting the stage, for instance, setting the stage for tactile understanding from APH, there is a set of materials that, and somebody talked about this, I guess it was Monday, talked about how using these kinds of things are important. There's like a spoon, a real spoon, and then there is a thermoform copy of the spoon. So it's like 2.5D, it's not exactly 3D. And then there's an outline drawing of a spoon. So that transition is something you really need to go through and teaching kids to understand the concepts that are involved. Some of the activities, if you're talking about maps with older kids, get a globe, a tactile globe, and look at where a country is in relation to other countries on the globe, and then show them how that map is there. Let's see, if you, with like high school age kids and they're studying electrical circuits, get a circuit board. Somebody who works on computers can give you a circuit board, and then give them a diagram of that circuit board. Give them a real thing to look at, and then a diagram, a tactile graphic of that kind of thing. Motion symbols are something that is a sighted situation. How many of you have seen a picture, cartoon, drawing, whatever, that has little parentheses by the feet, or a bird is flying and there are little parentheses looking things by the wings? Those are symbols that there's motion happening. That is not intuitive to a tactile reader. So someone who has a tiger embosser and who just takes a cartoon symbol like that and embosses it, the kids are not going to understand what that is. If you do it with a capsule paper fuser, a Piaf or a swell form machine, and end up with those little symbols on there, they're little things that don't make any sense. Oh, another 3D to 2D activity is in looking at pictures of cars or trucks. In the first picture at the top, this young guy is sitting on a toy car that you can ride, a riding kind of thing. It's not a car, it's a truck. And then if you go from that thing, which is sort of not the real thing, but it's a bigger model of the real thing, down to the matchbook trucks and cars and vans and that kind of stuff, and then to a drawing of that truck, just making that transition from something that's more real down to something that's a symbol that represents it. Another good way to do that is to use a drawing slate, whether it's the Intact drawing tablet from Easy or a sensational blackboard. an old, I don't know, you guys may not even remember or may not have ever even seen. A Sewell raised line drawing kit has a mylar sheet and a sort of a clipboard thing that's got rubber on it, or a Draftsman. They're all essentially going to work out pretty much the same way. But have your student trace things on those and immediately see the symbol that represents that real thing that's on there. So take a glass and or a cup and have them trace around the base of it. And then there you go. You have, right there in front of you, you have the symbol that's going to represent that glass. In the Lightbox materials, and they're in several other places as well from APH, there are all these little cards that have cutouts, and they have cutouts of jackets and spoons and toothbrushes and all kinds of things for kids to use on the Lightbox. Those are great things because they're real sturdy, and you can use them to trace on the inside and trace outline of a jacket. And so here you have this outline shape, and then you have a real jacket laying out flat on the table, and you go from the real thing to a representation of the thing, which is really sort of a fun thing to do. The geometric forms from APH are an interesting thing for helping develop concepts. They come with a plastic sheet that has the outline shape of the three different shapes that are in there. And there's a cube, and there's a pyramid, and there's a ball. And then there's a half of a ball that's in there. Then there are the flat versions of that, a square and a circle and a triangle. And in that little sheet, it's raised line so that they can match up not only the flat two-dimensional shape with the outline on the white card, but also the three-dimensional one. Those are things that are not intuitive to blind kids, not even a little bit intuitive. So the difference between a cube and a square, they're as different as a dog and a cat. They're just not even close to the same things for most kids. So these are the kinds of things you need to be teaching kids when they're really, really young. This is a set of materials that was made by Hungry Fingers, and it comes with a whole bunch of little pieces of furniture. I have one right here. You may not be able to see this too well. Comes all these little pieces of furniture. Then there's a box that has a cutout. And so when you're trying to explain to a kid why we use this shape, the one that's in the top form, the top picture, and you see it over on the right in the booklet, why do we use this shape to mean a table? And because they're able to go from a replica, this is not the real thing, obviously. Hopefully you've done the real thing to the little wooden table. And then go to what is the symbol that we use for that table, which is one horizontal line and two short vertical lines. This kind of information is something we have to teach kids. They do not automatically get that transfer for symbols. Okay, the third area is mechanics. And it was interesting to listen to Tessa talking about the studies that they've done on how kids are reading Braille. So it's interesting to see how kids read tactile graphics as well. See what happens with each hand as they're doing. Can't wait for somebody to do a study on that one. I don't think that there's been one that's been done as far as I know. The first piece of mechanics is distinguishing textures. And of course, that needs to start out with On the Way to Literacy and the Moving Ahead books that are out there. There are about a zillion things for teaching, distinguishing different textures along the way. A ton of stuff that's out there for you to access. Tracking and tracing are important tasks. There are those flip over concept books at APH that Oh, there's an incomplete sentence. That one is textures, one is line fast. There's a new one that's fractions. It's not really about fractions. It's showing two parts that you need to put together. Like there's a half a turtle, and then over here there's another half a turtle, and you have to flip those two together so you have a whole turtle. So there are lots of different, not to mention the Mangold materials, which are not about tactile graphics, but they are about tracing a shape of something to figure out what it is, and also tracking the very beginning, the level 1 materials that are there. Oh, and speaking of the Mangold material, well, I'll talk about those when just a few minutes here. Having fine motor skills is really important. One of the things our kids generally don't develop is a grasp for holding a pencil or for holding a crayon, because they don't have many tasks that involve doing that. So they don't really don't have the fine motor skills to be able to hold a pencil and manipulate it. So that's why it's important to have them tracing things on a drawing board, or have them coloring things. There's so many different new coloring book kinds of things out nowadays, but having them coloring is real important. Having them use the pencil for some meaningful kinds of activities is really an important thing to helping them have the mechanics to do what they need to do. And the fourth area is comparing features. And we need to have really clear discussion about the features of everything. We're talking about ears on a bunny, to the ears on a horse, to the ears on a dog, to your ears, in both in real life and also in a drawing kind of a thing, in a tactile graphic format. Anything that is a feature that you can take from real life into where it's going to be into a tactile graphic, that's a great way to get started. Just with little kids, a face, they may know where their own nose is, but when they look at a diagram or a picture of something that has a person with a nose, that doesn't feel the same at all. So learning that little circle or whatever, that little carrot, whatever shape it is that represents a nose, is important for our kids starting from the time they're really, really little. And speaking of that, when should you start? 6 months is not too early to start kids developing tactile skills and the language and the motor memory and the touch memory to get them going. Their first toys, as you know, should have a variety of textures and shapes. And hopefully you can help their parents figure that out, make sure that they have those. When they become preschoolers or kindergartners, you want to make sure that's carried through and that they have as many opportunities as possible to look at things that represent a real thing. And that touch language needs to be there every day, all day long, with everything they're doing. One of the best resources that's available that I've read is called Teaching Touch. And Lois Harrell wrote it a long time ago, but it's still just as true as anything. I would encourage you to order one of those. Okay, Liz, get busy. You guys order a stack of them. I would encourage you to have access to one of those for Teaching Touch because it's wonderfully laid out. It's very simple. It's very clear and very logical. So I'd encourage you to get one of those. Another thing that's a great a great resource is experiential learning. And this is for babies. This is for little ones. Lots of activities, and this is something that you might want to share with parents. There's also a calendar. APH has a calendar, which is everyday exposure to experiences. And that again helps kids experience lots of different textures and lots of different touching kinds of things. Reach Out and Teach is another thing that's a great resource for parents. And I would encourage you to make sure that parents have access to these resources in whatever way you can do that budgetarily, so that they can work on this with their little ones before they actually get to school. And they can work on these kinds of things at home. That's a real important piece. Tactile Treasures has been around since shortly after Covered Wagons, I think. There's a new version of it, thank goodness, but I'm so glad APH is still doing that. They were good. For a while, they sort of discontinued it, and then they decided to start again. It is thermoform copies of real things, and you can find the real things fairly easily to match, to do that whole transition. And this is about math and accounting kinds of things and language concepts for young children. And it's a handy resource to have to work with your little guys. So things like a key, and then you have 3 or 4 different keys that are not the same. They have different kinds of features, and you look at the one that's there and see if you can match it. And then you look at all the different other ones and you can talk about the features. I mentioned earlier setting the stage for tactile understanding. And it does have some really nice beginning things like thermoform copies, and they're almost fully 3D. They're very deep things. And you see right in the very center of this picture, a pair of scissors on the left side, and then a thermoform copy of scissors, and then an outline drawing of scissors. And there, I don't even know how many there are, maybe 20 of those things. And the real things are actually in the box as well. It has some stuff for older kids as well in that set, but we're not going to talk about those right now since we're talking about things for younger kids. I love the On the Way to Literacy series. I hope they don't ever stop making this series. It gives kids a lot of opportunities and to experience lots of different textures along with the story. So they all have meaning, and there's, you know, what you're looking at is meaningful because it fits into the whole story. I have to tell you a wonderful story. I had a preschooler, a totally blind preschooler, that was the cutest little kid. And he, we were in a summer, it was in a summer program. And one day we were having snacks, and we had pretzels for snacks. And all of a sudden he started like gasping, oh, oh, oh. And he jumped up from the snack table, and he walked with crutches. So he really had to work hard to get there. And he went over to the area where the books were and went through the books until he found the one that had the pretzel in it. And he said, I get it, I get it, I get it. And that was the most, he did not get that that was a plastic pretzel until he had a real pretzel and was able to match those two together. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to see a kid actually getting it. And then he was able to like get the Cheerios, understand about the broken crayon. So these books are really great resources for you to use. Here's the little parenthesis things that I was telling you about. I'm not sure exactly what this little thing is at the bottom of this, in this cartoon of the boy running. Maybe it means dust or footprints. I'm not exactly, maybe he's kicking up dust. I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody notices what's wrong with this picture, but when I looked at a whole bunch of different images of people running to find a good one that had these crazy little parenthesis marks on it, I discovered that a lot of them have the wrong, I mean, this one has his right foot forward and his right arm forward. That's not the way we run, except that I have seen blind kids who run that way because they're using one hand for sighted guide. And so they are like really sort of off kilter. But if you need to be teaching kids about motion, an artist mannequin, which is, this is George, which is easy to find in arts and crafts store. I think they even have them at Michael's. But in an art supply store, they always have them. But a mannequin is a wonderful thing to have. And here's my George. I have a big one and I have a little one as well. But if you need to teach kids about body movement and what happens when you start to run, you can, all the joints are articulated. So you can change those all around. You can use those. When you think about older kids who are in physiology, anatomy classes, science classes that involve different kinds of body parts, that you need some way to show them what that is besides a diagram. And you can do that using this as manipulative and then match this to any kind of a diagram that you have going on. So this is a great little tool to have, and it's not an expensive thing at all. This is another thing from Poland. Bob Marek, who is, interestingly, he started off as a college professor and he started teaching blind kids English as a second language and got really involved in this. And now he just makes products for teaching blind kids things, and he goes all over the place. He does research with that, and he's just really fun. This is what he calls FlexiMan. And all of these joints are articulated. So this is a 2D version of George, of the mannequin, the drawing mannequin. And so he has cards that go with it, so that if this is how your body works when you're walking, then you can change the FlexiMan so that he fits in this pattern. It helps kids understand motion and body movement and what happens with different kinds of activities, whether you're jumping or walking or running or whatever. Another really, really good resource are the Squid Tactile Activities magazines. And I think APH has stopped producing them, as far as I know. There's 7 of them. It would be wonderful for them to keep going, but I know it's real time intensive for them to do these. But anyway, it introduces so many different tactile experiences. And if you can look through those and see what makes sense, and then provide a real or a replica of whatever it is they're supposed to be working on, then you've helped kids make that transition from concrete to abstract along the way. I don't know whether there are any squids out there that are available, but that would be interesting to see. Another way to do that is this Tactile Town, which is fairly new, and it's 3D O&M kit. And so what it does is it gives you a bird's eye view, and you want to make sure your students understand what that means, of a town, which you can create by it's like a giant Wheatley kit, which is a wonderful, wonderful tool as well. But it's a bird's eye view of what an intersection is going to look like, or where the library is, or whatever you want to create on there as far as a map of something, somewhere to go, a mobility map. And that's a great tool as well. Again, kids need to understand the view. They need to understand that you're looking at symbols of what the real thing is. Proportion and size is going to be a big issue. Okay, this is the new Talking Tactile tablet that should be available early in January. And so right now what's happening is that a grant was awarded for working on tactile skills for older people who've lost their vision, because having some tactile skills is important. Even though many of them don't learn to read Braille, actually they tend to use audio. At least they need to have good tactile skills for just a whole bunch of kinds of things. Anyway, this is what it looks like, and these are some materials that are going to be part of a set of training materials for teaching tactile skills. The little, I wish my cursor was bigger. This little thing houses a camera underneath it, and in the corner of each picture is a QR code, and the camera reads it, and then the thing talks and tells you what it is, so that you can go through all of these. You can slide this thing around. These little cards actually fit on top of something else, and you can have it be a tactile audio experience, which is really cool. Also, all of the SAL materials, Sally Mangold's Mangold reading materials, have been updated to UEB, and they have also been transitioned to be used with this piece of equipment. And over here to the right, you'll see a Braille keyboard with a line advance and a backup space. And so as they're brailing, it also talks and, you know, gives them auditory feedback. So it's going to be fun to see what that actually looks like when it gets all done. But at any rate, there will be some tactile training materials there for kids. A few years ago, I wanted to look at, so for the kids who know how to figure it out, how do they do it? What exactly do they, what strategies do they use? What sequence do they use? And so I spent some time with students that were good tactile readers. At that point, I was at the Colorado IMC, but I prevailed upon some of my TVI colleagues that I had taught with for years before and said, I need some kids that read well. So I had some kids in several parts of the state, from all over the state actually, that participated in this whole thing. And basically I videoed kids reading tactile graphics. And at some point I'll sit down with those videos and take out snippets so that we can look at those. But from that, I looked at how is it they go about doing it. First question they say, okay, so where am I? What is this that I'm looking at? And so if you ask the student to look for a title and then look for, to see whether or not there's a transcriber's note, to give them an idea of what they're looking at, think about the student. They've just sat there and read through, they're in social studies class or they're doing social studies homework. And they've just sat there and they've read through 10 pages, 10 Braille pages of stuff. And all of a sudden here comes a graphic. Well, that graphic could be about anything on any of those previous 10 pages, or it could be about something on the next 10 pages. They have no idea what it's going to be. And the fact, and tactile readers do not build up an image library like sighted kids do. They do not, they don't just, oh, this is a map of Florida. It'll take them, what if you ask them about a map of Arizona and they live in Florida? They're going to have no clue. They don't build up those images. And so having a hint as to what they're looking at is real important. And the guidelines and standards for tactile graphics say that you may add a title to a graphic if there is not one already there in the print text. I think it should say you must, but I don't get to rule the world, sadly. Anyway, so you want to encourage kids to look for that title and see whether or not there's a transcriber's note that may have some kind of description about what it is they're about to look at. Then what the kids usually do is they'll scan the whole page and they'll like look for a starting point. And interestingly, what most kids do is whatever is the most outstanding texture or the highest point or the roughest, whatever is the most, looks like the most important texture, they assume that is the most important information. And they'll very often choose that as a starting point. And then they'll scan the key. Now, when you think about hand movements, what most kids do is they will keep their hand on that point of reference that they chose, whether it's a point symbol for the capital of the state of Florida or whatever it is. And then they'll go to the key and scan it and see what they can find that's over there. And you want to encourage them to look at that key before they try and figure out what else is on the graphic. The key will tell them what kind of information is there. So therefore, what is it they're looking at? It's all right there in the key. So you want to ask them to look for important clues like text and labels that are on the graphic. And again, the most important, the most prominent textures. And then less important clues. They may find that there's some little tiny, there are a number of different kinds of lines. So they might say, okay, this one's big and rough, and this one's fat, but it's smooth, and this one's skinny, tiny, a lead line to something or other. But they'll look for the less important clues. So then if you ask them to read any text out loud and make conjectures about what it is they're looking at, what do you think this whole graphic is about? They've scanned over the graphic, they've sort of scanned over the key. And so asking the student to give give you some feedback about what they think it's going to be about based on all that information. That'll help you understand what they're processing and what they're getting out of the graphic that they're looking at. Then if you ask the student during this conversation to compare and describe textures for areas, lines, and points, to trace major minor lines and describe where they go and what they represent. This helps them to begin to develop an overall concept of what's happening within that graphic. The third thing they do is go, okay, so what am I looking for here? After they've done all this scanning, and hopefully you've had a conversation with them about it, if it's a new encounter of a graphic. The kids that I worked with all went through the same kind of process, regardless of whether they were doing it independently or whether they were discussing with me along the way. So the readers started to build up an overall concept of the graphic and what's in the graphic. And then you ask them to look for details in the key, to figure out what the point symbols are and what they represent, to read labels and their abbreviations. So you may have a two-cell abbreviation in the actual graphic, but in the key, you have to find that two-cell abbreviation and read what it says, what it's representing. And so then they began to get an idea of the fact that there's important data that's actually represented on the graphic and it's explained in the key. So then the last question that kids tend to ask is, so how do these pieces all fit together? They started out building a picture by scanning everything in the graphic, figuring out how big it is, what does it sort of cover, looking at the key to figure out what kind of details are going to be in this graphic. And so they began to put together a pretty solid picture of what's happening by putting all these pieces together and sort of assembling this little puzzle for the whole content. And the same process happens with first and second graders as it does with junior high and senior high kids. And when I looked at the kids, especially the kids we videoed, several of the kids we videoed were horrible tactile graphics readers. And I'm going, how did you get through high school without being able to read a graphic? I can't imagine going through any science, any social studies, any math without being able to read the graphics. And what the kids told me was, oh, somebody explained it to me. I don't like graphics, so somebody explained it to me. I'm going, oh my God, how much content this kid must have missed by not knowing how to do this. But the same process happened with both the little kids and the older kids. And that was what was fascinating. That's how I came up with these 4 pieces, because they pretty much, ones that were successful, pretty much followed the same pattern. So if you try this with your students, I'd love feedback on whether or not it works, whether or not it helps everything else. The most successful strategy that all of them exhibited was developing a system for how they attack each graphic. And one of the kids actually used the word attack. Okay, this is how I attack it. This is how I figure out what's going on. As long as they develop a system that works for them and they use the same system every time, they'll be successful in being able to sort out the graphics. And some of them are going to use their right hand to hold their place on the graphic and their left hand to read the key. And part of the reason the key is on the left side, the facing page, the left side of an open book, part of the reason that that's there is that so many kids read with their left hand, their non-dominant hand. And so that's why we put it over there. And as long as they use whatever system they use, whether it's, they read everything, and some kids will read everything in the key first, and then they'll go over and start looking at it one by one in the graphic. That's just how they think and how their strategy works. But whatever it is can encourage the kids to develop a system and use it every single time and help them practice with that system every single time. So I've talked a lot about teaching students to read graphics, but we need to be teaching students to read and write tactile graphics. We teach them to read and write print. And we should certainly be teaching them to read and write graphics. And that's another story for another day, how we can get students to write their own graphics. But I think that's just as important as being able to read them. So I would open this up for any questions that might be there. And I am not, let me see. Let's see if I'm...
I don't see any questions. Somebody has their hand raised, but okay. I don't know if, who is that? Let me see. Cindy Ross, you have your hand raised. Did you have a question or a comment? I could give you the microphone. Let me see what happens here. Maybe she stepped away from her computer.
Oh, maybe, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't see, yeah. Oh no, that was a mistake. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I will lower your hand for you then. We have a question from Tina. How can I encourage my preschooler with low vision to engage more in touch?
Probably one of the things that would be that would help would be to get your preschooler to get some of the coloring book things that are out there. If you have an embosser that produces graphics, you can just Google coloring books for young children, and it'll give you a million images for that you can emboss on your Braille embosser, and to give them all these images that are only embossed, they're not in color, and encourage them to color it, to figure, you know, this is a secret message. See what you can do to figure out what color it in and figure out what's happening. That's one of the ways to get them to do it. Having interesting textures on things, especially for little kids. They want a graphic kind of an image to say, ta-da, here I am. You know, they want an interesting, strong texture. And if you put textures on things, even for kids with low vision, that are interesting, their natural reaction is to touch it. So anything that you're going to, if for instance, you have a counting activity going on, I don't know how young your preschooler is, but if there's an accounting activity, put things they can count that are on there, whether it's a thick sticker or whether it's bump dots or whatever you can find that is an interesting texture. And that's what they're supposed to count. That will encourage them to use that tactile sense and count things.
That was like, Tina was saying that was helpful. And so Amanda has a question. Do transcriptionists create the tactile graphics, or is that a separate department when making a book?
Repeat that. Please repeat that for me. I can't see the chat for whatever reason. I'm not sure. Okay.
So the question was, do transcriptionists create the tactile graphics, or is that a separate department when making a book?
Okay. Are we talking about Braille transcribers?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you're
like some transcribers do tactile graphics. Others absolutely will not do it. And if you think about it, transcribers are people who are very exact. They always want to know exactly what the rule is for anything. And they're very rule bound, which is why we love them, because they produce perfect Braille for us, for our students, for our kids. But doing tactile graphics is not very rule bound. I mean, you have to sort of fly by the seat of your pants pretty often to figure out how to do a tactile graphic. It's a totally different thought process. So some transcribers absolutely do not like to do them. So what happens is they tend to work in teams. I can think of, I don't know what part of the state you're located in, the Jacksonville transcribing group. They have some people that love doing tactiles and some that don't. So they pair up, and there are some people that do the tactiles for the book that's going to be transcribed. And that's how it usually happens.
And so Charlotte Wells is on here. I know she's a Braille transcriber in a district, and she's saying she's enjoying learning how to create tactile graphics. I'm sure that's a major undertaking.
It is, yeah. Yeah, learning to do it is a completely different thought process.
Yes.
Okay, now I can see the chat. I unshared my screen. And Sue mentioned Drawing with Your Perkins Brailler. It is a wonderful resource. Kim Charlson, who's at the Library for the Blind at Perkins School for the Blind, wrote that. She is a Braille reader, lifelong Braille reader, and she wrote that book. And that's a wonderful way to get kids to begin creating tactile graphics, following the pattern. And you have to go so many spaces, and then you do so many ERs, and and they make a picture out of it. And that's a fun activity for kids to do.
So, okay, Mia was saying that the pictures of the raised line kits, which one was the one in the top left corner, the bottom left with the small raised line? So
it's a Sewell raised line, yeah. Let me just flip. The one in the top left is, I think, the one from Easy LLC, and it's called an Intact, INTACT drawing board. And it's it's a lot cheaper, very much like the Draftsman. Oh, and APH has also come out with a new, this one, the Intact opens up, and so the paper, you can have your extra paper inside it, as well as the stylus. The APH also has a new thing like the Draftsman. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's also less expensive.
Tactile Doodle, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. It's called Doodler or something. Yep, that's what it's called. The thing in the bottom left is the Sewell raised line kit, drawing kit, and it's old. And as far as I know, no one is currently producing anything quite like it. At one point, one of the companies decided they were going to duplicate it since it was no longer made, and by Perkins, and they did, and they were usually in bunches of pieces when they arrived. They were not very well made, so I don't even know if they're still selling it. In the top right-hand corner is the Sensational Blackboard, and actually you can get that from Educational Teaching. You can get it directly from Anne at Sensational Blackboard, and I think National Braille Press also carries it, but I'm not positive about that. That's sort of a rubbery, it's sort of a replacement of the Sewell, because the Sewells were, number one, you had to have the Mylar paper, and number two, they didn't make them anymore. Anne Cunningham, who's a tactile artist here in Colorado, developed the Sensational Blackboard. And it's this rubbery kind of a board on a heavy plastic, and you put a piece of regular paper on it, a regular copier paper on it, and you just use a regular pen and you draw, and it creates a raised thingy on regular paper. So you don't need an expensive Mylar paper or a sheet of plastic or anything like that, or the German film, which is what both the Draftsman and the Intact drawing board use. You just use regular copier paper, and it's a real fun, quick, easy thing to do, handy thing to do.
So that was called the Sensational Blackboard. Is that what you said, Lucia?
Yeah, it's called the Sensational Blackboard.
Sensational Blackboard. I'm putting that in the chat. I found the link there.
Yeah.
And
yes, and the Sewell that, yes, somebody mentioned that the Sewell was made again by the Maxi-8s. That's exactly right. They're not worth your money. Don't buy one, because if they're falling apart and they don't do what they're supposed to do. And so Maxi-8s will probably sue me. There you go.
I do remember we had it. Okay.
Oh, and Leah says that her district did you buy a, Mia, did you buy a
she's talking about the Sewell, yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you got it in good shape. Yeah.
Like in Polk County, they love these sensational blackboards. And I wanted to go back to a question from Amanda. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, she was asking, can you let a child guide you in how graphics are made? Should it be their preferences, or is that not a good idea?
No, that's a wonderful idea. Anytime you make a graphic for a student, you need to take into account what kind of textures they can tolerate and how fine the differences between two different textures can be for that child to understand them. Younger kids tend to need things that are really, really different from each other. So for instance, you think about someone who's used to texture that's parallel lines, really close parallel lines, and they're horizontal. And then they also use one that's pretty much the same thing, but they're diagonal or vertical. Well, some kids can sort that out. Some kids don't get it. They're like, they look all the same to them. That whole directionality thing's a little hard for them to figure out, that those lines are going a different direction. They're the same lines. So now you have to go to a different cognitive level to figure out, so how are they different? Well, the direction's different. So for some kids, it's more confusing. For some kids, they're able to, make those real fine distinctions. Depends on their age, their experience in reading tactile graphics, their attitude about it. A lot of kids say, oh, I hate graphics, I hate graphics. When we did the research project, we did a research project before the guidelines and standards were written. And we had 36 kids from all over the US and Canada that participated in it. They were older kids. They were either high school or college level kids, and they were lifelong Braille readers. And down to a T, down to the very end, almost every single kid would say, we would give them an example that was thermoform copy, and they'd say, oh, I hate this plastic. But what we found was their answers were their accuracy in the answers was as good as or better than the other samples of the same. We gave them examples in a number of different production methods. They had at least 2, sometimes 3 different production methods for each example. And then they had tasks to do around those. And the thermoforms, they did wonderfully well because you can show so much more detail with thermoform. And it's a laborious process, and most people don't even know what a thermoform machine looks like anymore. But we did find that kids, even though they said, oh, I hate this, they were able to do a really good job in taking care of the tasks that we gave them to do with the thermoform copies. So that story was about preference. So for some kids, they will like some textures and some production methods, and some won't. A lot of kids don't like swell paper. And usually it's because their teachers don't like it. They say it feels creepy. They don't like how it feels. There aren't enough differences in the texture or the width of lines, that kind of thing. And usually it's because the teachers say, I don't like how this feels. But at any rate, there's some kids that don't like it. And there's some kids who love it. They're fine with it. So you want to pay attention to what your student is comfortable with, what they like, what they're able to sort through. And yeah, you should always ask them, how is this working for you? What could I do that would make it better for you? It'd be great to have that luxury if you were a transcriber. Most transcribers don't have that luxury. They don't have direct
to actually talk to the student. Yeah. Because Charla was going back to the conversation we were just having. You were talking about one of the products that was not so great to buy. I think you were talking about the Sewell kit. Yeah.
I was talking about the new Sewell that's available from FIMC-VI. The original one that was made was sold by Perkins Products, what's now called Perkins Products, at Perkins School for the Blind. They stopped making it. And so FIMC-VI decided they were going to do it. And they have somebody somewhere that builds them for them. And my experience, and it's not just one person, it's multiple people, is that they've not been happy with the quality. The little things that you screw the paper on fall out. The rubber's not consistent from one to the next. Someone I talked to had bought 3 of them, And two of them came with the parts falling apart or the rubber peeling off the background or whatever. And the rubber was not the same on all three of them.
Mm.
So there's apparently a quality control issue unless that's improved. I'm looking at Sue's things for quick and cheap drawings. Sometimes use heavy duty tinfoil on a rubbered clipboard, remembering it's going to be reversed. Oh, that's great. That's like using aluminum diagramming foil. One of the things you want to be sure to be very careful about is if you use a tool that has teeth in it, like a tracing tool for sewing, which is very typical. People use that a lot. If you use that and don't have and use something that is going to create a sharp surface like aluminum diagramming foil and maybe the heavy duty tin foil, you know that that's going to be sharp if it has teeth in it. If you're drawing with a pen, like a regular ballpoint pen, you aren't going to have the sharpness that you would have otherwise. A braille eraser, great idea. Thanks, Sue. That's a great suggestion.
Right. Yeah, it's a great conversation, a good reminder that just as with everything else, we have to be intentional with teaching students how to read tactile graphics, that it's not going to happen through osmosis or by accident or anything like that. They need to learn how to do that too.
And I think one of the most important things to remember is that our kids don't build up that image library so that you can hand them an outline of Florida. A week later, you can hand them another one, and they may not recognize it right away, especially without a title or without labels or whatever. They may not recognize it at all. And of course, if you live in a rectangular state like Colorado and several other states, I mean, I hand the kid a map of Colorado and they think, what is this, a rectangle or is it a square? What am I supposed to do with this? Are there measurements for this? And without realizing that's what it is, because our kids don't build up that library. They don't recognize something when they see it right away. And that's why it's really important that from the time they're little, you start out with going from a real thing to a replica of that thing and then to a graphic so that they can make that transition more quickly.
Oh, Amanda's saying that's so interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
So if you have any other questions, if I can help you in any way, my email is lucia@tactilegraphics.org.
I will put that in the chat.
And you're welcome to email me if I can help in any way. Thank you for putting it there.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and if there's any other questions that you all think of, Lucia will be back with us at 4 o'clock. Tess McCarthy will be in there. She did the presentation on hand movements in Braille and the importance of using two hands together and all that good stuff. So it'll be interesting to have the two of you together to kind of see, your take together on any questions that people have.
I was so excited. I had not read her study, so I was really excited to listen to her presentation and she had a lot of the same questions that I've had about tactile graphics and reading them and figuring out how kids go about doing it.
Yeah, it's great that people are looking into those kinds of things and thinking about things.
Yeah,
it really is important for our students. All right, well, so with that, I am going to share my screen again so we can do our housekeeping here. So, all right, so here we go. Get my slides. So if you could, those of you who are here, if you could do our short and sweet 4-question evaluation from the Florida Department of Education. We are required to ask these questions for our trainings, and then we report the results back to the DOE every quarter. So you can use that QR code there. There's a bit.ly FIMC-eval. This link is always on our events page on our website, FIMC-VI.org. So I will give you a moment to grab that if you need to. If you've been doing these evaluations, you're heading back to the same form you've been using all week. So you could even bookmark that page if you need to. Yeah, we've got some more comments in the chat. This was fantastic, much needed. Thank you. Yeah, I don't think this is anything we've had a webinar on in, to my knowledge, at least in a long while. So obviously this was a topic that we should be talking about more often.
Yeah.
Okay, and so
you know, one of the things I would welcome knowing about is what would be helpful to you as far as a checklist or a list of vocabulary that you need to make sure kids understand, and like spatial awareness or whatever. That would be great if there are things that would be helpful tools for you about teaching your kids tactile graphics. Just email me and let me know, and I'll see what we can work out.
Oh, and I guess, Lucia, this is not a bad time for us to tell people that you are creating a module for us that is going to go on the FIMC Canvas site. Our goal is to have it up there, I believe, by the beginning of next school year. So, and it will be all about tactile graphics. So if this is your jam, if this is what you need and you want to learn more about, stay tuned, and we'll be working with Lucia on that. So that's an exciting collaboration we have with her. Yeah, so stay tuned. Oh, and Sue is reminding everybody that we plan our topics for our workshops every year based on our feedback from evaluations and the annual survey that we do every year. And this was a hot topic from last year's results. So that's how we came up with all this. So we do listen to you all and try to meet your needs and make sure that we're helping you serve your students. So, okay, so before I forget, we have our closing code here. If you're looking for in-service ACB or AP credit, the closing code is puzzle. Puzzle. It's just like putting together a puzzle. And you can, to get to a form where you will get a certificate, you want to use this QR code or the bit.ly or the form on our events page of our website. It's always on that page. You're going to fill the form out, and a certificate for 1.5 credits will be emailed back to you. If you don't receive that certificate within a day or so, contact me or anyone else at FIMC. I'll put my email in the chat, and let us know that you did not get your certificate because something likely went wrong on the back end, and we want to make sure you get that. Okay, and here is our contact information, our mailing address, phone number, website, everything you need. So when we finished out here, we're going to get back together at 4 o'clock. That will be in a Zoom meeting room, so that way you can have your cameras and your microphones on. So any questions you have for Lucia or Tess, I will be there as well, probably with some of our other FIMC folks. And I would like to get that link to post in the chat too before we leave here. And then tomorrow at 9 o'clock, we're going to start up again with our Brailing with the Experts. We have a session. The first one is really specific for Florida, but we have an exciting conference announcement to make. So if you come to that one, I know that's a little bit early, but you'll get to hear some breaking news, if you will. And then after that, let me find my agenda. We have, let's see, make sure I give out the right time. At 9:45, Gerald Abner and Jasmine DeGrant are going to be presenting on when your students' learning media is symbols. And then at 12 o'clock, Diane Wormsley will be presenting on her I Am Able literacy program that she created. So that will be another great day tomorrow. Both of those sessions use the same link that you used today for this webinar to get back into those. And then there will be another debriefing room tomorrow at 1:30 with those presenters that we have tomorrow. So as I promised, let me grab that debriefing room link. I just lost it again. That link is on our website, but just in case anybody. Okay. So go ahead and grab that link. You might not be able to join right away. Well, yeah, don't use it yet. We're not going in there till 4, but we will be back. So you can go take a little bit of a break here, stretch your legs, and we'll see you in a little bit. All right, thank you, Lucia.
Thank you, it was fun.
Yes, we always enjoy having you present for us. So thank you.
I hope I get lots of emails about things you guys, tools you guys need.
Exactly, yes. All right, we'll see y'all later.